Brella versus Dualie Squelcher. These weapons are known as some of the best solo stallers in the game, being able to drag out 1v1s almost indefinitely and being very tricky to fight without coordinated play. These weapons often take attention off the team and set up for favorable fights, while not being as good at getting kills on their own. But with the series, you know what we're here for. We're trying to find out which one is actually better. So today, I'm going to compare their stats and give my opinion for which one I think is stronger. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy, or consider becoming a member to help support the channel. Let's get started with the main category, stalling. While obviously not everything is down to which weapon can do this better, this is the main reason these weapons are picked, and they both have very different ways of stalling out their fights. Let's start off with Dualie Squelcher. This weapon has two tools it uses to keep itself alive for a long period of time. The first one is its dodge rolls, giving the weapon unparalleled mobility for its range value, since these, rather than having end lag, have the ability to slide. This keeps its mobility far above that of other weapons, which allows it to safely keep at a distance while still applying meaningful damage to opponents. The other factor that helps with this is the weapon's range. Obviously, the mobility wouldn't matter as much if it had to be up close to the opponent, but since this weapon also has quite good range, it's able to keep most weapons at a distance where they aren't able to fire back. It's the combination of these two working together that make the weapon really difficult to pin down. In fact, even going against weapons that do outrange it, this weapon's still very threatening at being able to close the gap or move between pieces of cover to apply pressure. Brella, on the other hand, only has one mechanic it's really working around here, which is its shield. This has 500 HP and regens whenever the shield is not open at a rate of 2.5 HP per frame, meaning anytime the shield is dropped, whether you're flaring it or swimming around, it is regaining HP as long as it's not broken. If it is broken though, even with a buffed respawn time compared to Splatoon 2, it is far too slow to get it back in a team fight. There is also a shield launch ability to gain more HP. This is situationally useful if you're near some kind of corner that you can use to stay behind the shield, but for the most part, you're almost never going to see this being used. How good Brella is at tanking very much depends on what it's going against. Some weapons have the ability to hit around it, or others do high damage to the shield. However, there are still a fairly decent amount of them that don't really have any way to do meaningful damage to it, such as shooters, dualies, and splattlings, just to name some examples. This means against specific weapon classes, Brella's stalling is arguably even better than Dualie Squelcher's. However, there are weapons that are very good at dealing with it, such as blasters hitting around it, and chargers, splatanas, and stringers doing high damage to it. Still, even against those weapons, being able to tank slow shots or prevent blasters from hitting directs is very noteworthy. But at the end of the day, Dualie Squelcher is much better at stalling against a wider variety of weapons, which gives it the slight edge in this category. Next up is paint. So I mentioned this in the Brella guide, but Bucket and Brella actually paint basically the same, though Brella does have a slightly better fire rate. The shield can also paint a little bit, but realistically isn't going to help too much in terms of getting your special. Dualie Squelchers, on the other hand, they paint really well. This category is pretty one-sided, to be honest, and Dualie Squelcher is definitely going to get the win, which is important considering paint can both amplify your own movement options and hinder that of the opponent when stalling. However, let's talk about the weapons solo killing. How good are they at being able to get picks completely by themselves without any teammates' help? Because sometimes when stalling, you're gonna pull opponents too far away and have to deal with it yourself. Dualie Squelcher's 4-shot kill time isn't that bad given its mobility, but it is pretty weak. The damage fall off also isn't too lenient on the weapon, so there really isn't a whole lot going for it here. Brella, on the other hand, does have weaker damage than it did in Splatoon 2, and while I definitely hamper on it as an unnecessary weakness for the weapon, I will say that it's not that bad. It can still pretty consistently 2-shot if you're close to the opponent or 3-shot at a distance, and while that's not amazing numbers, I think it's definitely a more consistent 1v1 weapon than Dualie Squelcher, especially given that 1v1s are kind of what Brellas are supposed to be good at. Next up is assisting. We talked about stalling already, but how well do they work with teammates that are able to capitalize on their stall? Dualie Squelcher, as I've mentioned in other videos, can't do that very well due to having 28 damage, meaning more often than not it's going to need to hit 2 hits in order to combo with teammates. 3 if it's something like a shooter you're working with. Brella, on the other hand, can assist in a way besides damage. It can actually shield teammates. Dualie Squelcher dancing around a teammate it's 2 feet away from isn't really going to do too much, but Brella actually has the ability to block for teammates, providing that damage. That alone already gives it a big edge, but on top of that, I think Brella is very likely to deal at least 30 damage, even with a shot that's not hitting all of its pellets, which means I think it actually pretty handily takes this category. Next up, ink efficiency. This is notable in 2 categories we already talked about, the paint and stalling, since obviously more ink efficiency means you're able to stall for longer. It also gives you better access to your sub-weapon. Now, both of these weapons have pretty bad ink efficiency, with both of them getting nerfed down pretty severely in Splatoon 2. However, Brella has actually made that up a decent bit with buffs. While it's not amazing by any means, I do think it is a little bit more consistent than Dualie Squelcher, given how much it has to use its rolls, while Brella is going to have some times where it doesn't need to use its shield, the main ink-hungry part of the weapon. And that brings us to the weapon kits. Let's start off with the sub-weapons. Brella has Sprinkler and Auto Bomb, while Dualie Squelcher has Splat Bomb and Beacon. These are very different sub-weapons in terms of utility, with 2 of the kits going with the Lethal Bomb, and the other 2 going with some kind of utility sub. I think the absolute bottom of the barrel here has to be Sprinkler. Not to say that it's even that bad. Brella does kind of need help getting its special, so it's not completely lost value, but it's just not as strong an option as some of the other ones on this list. I think it serves better for weapons with a bit more range. In third place to me would be the Beacon on Dualie Squelchers. While I do think it has some utility for being a beacon weapon that's actually pickable, there aren't that many of those, I think that Beacon's utility just can't measure up to the bombs when they do end up helping the weapon's kill time, which is a problem with both of them. This still isn't to say they're bad here. I think the top 3 are extremely close when it comes to their options, but I do think it ends up falling just a little bit shorter. Splat Bomb gets second place to me, and Auto Bomb in first. Pretty simple for the reasoning here. While both of these are bombs with slightly different utility, Auto Bomb being cheaper makes it much easier to use for these weapons with lower ink efficiency, whereas Splat Bomb is genuinely tough to use sometimes given how ink hungry the main weapon is, meaning I think it has a little bit more utility at the end of the day. Finally is the special weapons. This one's pretty obvious just from looking at them, but Dualie Squelcher is in 4th and 3rd place with Wavebreaker and Super Chump. It's hard to tell which one is better. The gap is honestly so close between the 2 that it usually depends on what sub the team comp you're running wants. Super Chump is 210 though, so I guess I'll give Wavebreaker a tiny advantage here, given it has slightly better synergy as well. As for Brella specials, as much as Inkjet synergizes way better with it, the gap in power between Jetpack and Tri-Strike is just too much here, so I'd have to give Tri-Strike the overall edge in terms of usefulness. It's definitely more awkward for Brella to use, but in this meta, Jetpack is really tough, especially on zones. Overall, this ended up being surprisingly competitive, with categories going one of either way. If you've kept up with competitive Splatoon, it's kind of obvious which one is better. Dualie Squelcher is out here actively winning good tournaments and got 2nd place in the King's Cup, a big Nintendo tournament in Japan, whereas Brella basically doesn't have anything at all. I still don't think the gap is actually that large though. Dualie Squelcher and Brella are both very difficult weapons that require someone one-tricking them to really get the most out of it. Dualie Squelcher is just worth it, while Brella isn't. But if Brella were to get some small buffs or its damage fixed to the point where it would be worth it, I definitely think there's potential to see it pushed like Dualie Squelcher. It does still have better matchups against specific weapons and more flexible kits, so hopefully it can end up back in the spotlight one day. But until then, Dualie Squelcher will take the win. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.